Hi, I'm Firas. I am a partner and co-founder at BrandBucket. Welcome to BrandBucket Academy. In this video, we will sit down with Margot Bushnaq, founder and CEO of BrandBucket, to explore the early days of building BrandBucket, how the marketplace evolved, and her personal journey from startup founder to brand naming expert. If you are struggling to find the perfect name or wondering how great brand names come to life, this one's for you. Let's dive in. Welcome to our podcast, here where we are going to be covering quite a bit, but maybe we can start with you introducing yourself and what do you do?
All right. I am Margot Bushnaq, the founder and CEO of BrandBucket. BrandBucket's a marketplace of premium domain names that we built for startups and entrepreneurs who want to go shopping for a name for the new venture.
Awesome. Very cool. So can you maybe start by giving us a little bit of a background on yourself, like early education, early interests, and how your interest evolved into forming BrandBucket?
Sure. My early education was in human biology, and I became very interested in neuroscience. And in my pathway of biology, I found a very unique major at Stanford called symbolic systems that combined not only neurobiology, but psychology and linguistics and computer science and philosophy. And in that pathway, I learned a lot about linguistics and a lot of how the spoken language, whether spoken by a human or by a computer, the emotions that words would evoke when you heard them.
Very cool. So you're combining philosophy also into the language?
That was not my favorite. It was, theory of knowledge and historical philosophy.
Very cool. Excellent. So maybe you can touch on your career beginnings. What was your early professional endeavors like?
Sure. I graduated in the height of the dot-com boom. So like everyone else in my degree, tried to get into software programming and software engineering, got hired into a job where I was doing just that. Then the dot-com bust happened. So in order to hang on, I went into developing CRM applications and later on getting more involved in the processes within a large enterprise and how to simplify and streamline sales departments, marketing departments, and built own internal software, incorporated large CRM solutions, built licensing for the other software that our company was selling, and just got very acutely involved in every department of every business and making it better and faster and cheaper to run.
Very cool. That's awesome. Can you maybe give us a bit of an insight in what was your first spark for branding? How did you get exposed to the world of branding or naming? Was there a project or a moment that pulled you in and made you decide that this is a path that you want to be able to take as an entrepreneur?
It kind of happened by accident. When I left my big corporate job, the two of us actually would sit around and we would talk about all the different ideas we would have. And it seemed like every other day we would dream up a product or a company or a solution. And the first thing you do before you can actually start even imagining how you would share it with the world is you give it a name. So we would sit around and I don't know if you remember this, but we would think of 10, 15 names for each idea that we had. And the first thing you do, being internet savvy, is you go see and you see if the .com is available for your name. And back then, there wasn't nearly as much competition as there is now for names. So we would find the majority of the things that we wanted, and we would register them. But we never went for the exact dictionary word because those are obviously all taken, but at the same time, they're very limiting. And so we loved kind of the play on a dictionary word or even just a totally made up word that sounded cool but evoked the feeling of what we were planning on doing.
Yep.
And around that time, I discovered expiring domain name auctions. And just for fun, I would sit up until 2 a.m. scouring through 6-letter names, 5-letter names, and I was just buying everything I could that was generic enough so that the next time we had a discussion about what we were going to name something, we had a bucket to pick from. We had a pile to kind of just like our own hoard of really cool names.
Yeah, I do remember. That's very cool. Yeah. So can you touch on your evolution as a leader? Coming in from the days where you started collecting some names and buying some on the auctions, and how did that end up evolving into a business and allowed you to drive as a founder and a CEO of a company where it is today?
Okay. The actual site brandbucket.com was never meant to be seen by the outside world. It was a WordPress site that we built for our own internal knowledge. We registered the domain name BrandBucket to be able to have an easy to remember place for us to go. We laid out the names on the site. It was actually your idea that you didn't want to look at a spreadsheet. You wanted to look at something beautiful. So you added logos for all of our names. But lo and behold, the search engines found it and crawled it and brought people to it. And we started to get feedback from people just like us, from founders and startup entrepreneurs that looked at the list and said, "This is genius. Thank you for putting this in front of me. Can I buy one?" And we sold a few here and there. And just being entrepreneurs ourselves, we looked around and we saw there is a huge gap in the market where people cannot not only look at a smaller curated subset of domain names for sale, because at that time you had to go to a marketplace that had millions and millions of names with very little filtering, very little logic as far as pricing. And we said there needs to be something, there needs to be a shopping experience for the people who either don't like brainstorming or have reached the end of brainstorming with no result. And that's not how you go about your daily life. When you need something, you don't invent it, you go shopping for it. So we saw the gap and we just went full force and said, we are going to build a customer-centric, a buyer-centric marketplace for domain names.
Yep. That's very cool. So this is definitely, jogs a lot of memories, I would say, going back in the days, but can you, what differentiated you, from the rest at that time? How did entrepreneurs go after buying names back then, and how were you different?
Back then, if you had to think of a name yourself, you had to go check if it was taken. If it was taken but not in use, you had to find the owner. And then you had to ask the owner if it was for sale. And if all of those were true, then you had to negotiate a price and agree to a price. And then you had to figure out how to transact and trade money for domain name in a safe and secure way. And the valuation ended up being the hardest part of that, honestly. Like, all of it is hard. All of it, trying to think of something, trying to find the person, seeing if you can have it. So all of that we took care of with the marketplace. But the toughest part about the type of name we were selling, which we coined as Brandable, which were completely made up short names that were pronounceable, that usually had no backlink. They didn't exist for very long, so they had no backlinks, they had no traffic, they had no search profile. They had no traditional kind of keyword value as far as like cars.com or beer.com. Those are obvious to the big players, the value of those. And so we had to kind of almost invent a way to price names that at that point either were considered by many to be worthless or, priceless.
Yep.
Something like Google, when the founders of Google bought it, it was $10 for them. It didn't exist. They made it up. And now it is worth billions and billions of dollars as a brand.
Yep.
And so we had to put a price on something that, yes, didn't exist and had no value originally, but it did have value to someone who could come in and save themselves time on the brainstorming and the negotiating.
Yep.
And so we developed a model. We developed a price point that made sense to founders like us. That was an exact calculation of the value of the time savings and the negotiations time savings.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about what you love most about what you do day to day, and what continue to inspire you as a founder or as a CEO of such a enterprise?
It's we've been doing this for a long time. It's 20 years now since we started this idea. And really, we're trying to stay true to the core of what we do. So there isn't a lot of pivoting. It would be very easy for us to get bored with something and to pivot away from it. But if we did, we would leave a gap in the domain name marketplace field. So we have to stay true to what BrandBucket is. So what really inspires me to stay the same, pretty much, as we were 20 years ago, but still be interested in this process and the industry, is really following the journey of our customers. I love to see when a name gets purchased, what happens to it. And I connect with the founders and I watch their journey. And it brings so much joy to see like our little babies out there in the world growing and becoming brands. They're little baby brands turning into big boy brands.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. That definitely drives a lot of the passion for anybody to be able to continue doing what they do.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. You told us a bit about how BrandBucket started and the origin of the story, but can you touch on what was the day-to-day like back in the early days? What were some of the accolades? What were some of the triumphs that you've accomplished and you felt proud of? And then what kept on driving you moving forward?
Sure. We, as I mentioned, we started out with just kind of a stockpile of our own domain names that were for sale. We were sitting around pretty much waiting for customers to come in. And we were taking orders when they would come in. And as we started to see more and more orders, we started working as engineers do on the process, thinking forward to, okay, imagine we were doing tenfold of the number of orders we are now. How do we streamline this so we don't have to hire 10 more people? So we were always working on the logistics behind the scenes, the engineering behind the scenes to make our lives easier. And an aha moment came when other domain owners, or even sometimes customers, would come and say, this is a great product. I have my own collection of names. Will you sell them for me? And we, again, we're thinking forward, to the future of what if we did scale this? What if we scaled the number of names we have from our 200 to 2,000 or 20,000 or 200,000? How would we get there? And what would that look like? And we realized we needed there was no way we could ever come up with 200,000 names that would be varied enough and creative enough just on our own. So we needed to start allowing other owners to create and bring inventory into our marketplace. So that opened up a whole another can of worms, because once you go from being a single seller platform to a multi-seller, you've now created two types of customers. You have your customers that are purchasing things from you, and you have your sellers that want to sell with you. And of those two bodies of people, one is always going to be much, much louder and much more demanding than the others. The people who are giving you money are very quiet, and they never tell you what they want to see. But the people who are expecting money from you and who want to be selling are very loud, and not in a bad way, but they have a lot of feedback and
Vocal.
a lot of advice, and
Yep.
they're very vocal, and they want to encourage you to grow because they want more sales, just like you want more sales for them. And that's the primary difficulty that we face to this day, is if you forget about your buyer, then everyone fails. Because if you start building for the people who are asking for things to be built, then you lose focus. And that is, I think, what's special about BrandBucket, is we constantly come back around and have to put blinders on and remember how it was in the early days when we wished something like BrandBucket existed for us as founders,
Yep.
and what we want to see. And we try to keep things clean and minimal and just a great experience for buyers, even if it sometimes seems that, we are not listening to sellers.
Yep.
We are, but at the end of the day, if we can sell more, everybody's happy, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I do recall many instances where creatives and sellers would just introduce ideas that we were able to adapt and adopt into the business.
Our ears are open.
Scale.
We're always listening, and we always
yeah, absolutely.
When it's a good idea, we take it, but we refine it with the buyer in mind.
With the buyer in mind, exactly. Yeah, that's absolutely on point. Over time, how has the BrandBucket community grown? Who were your early customers, and how have they changed?
Our early customers tended to be all repeat entrepreneurs. They were people who, from the get-go, understood the value of spending $3,000 today to shortcut the time it took to brainstorm and find a name. Now, we have a lot more educational material. The stigma of buying a domain name is no longer there. Many years ago, people didn't want to tell the world that they had spent $3,000 on the domain name. It was almost like everybody just wanted to find the needle in the haystack and be proud that we named ourselves Zynga after our dog and it wasn't taken, and so we grabbed it. But now it's almost the opposite. If you insist on using a domain name for your company that has not already been registered, it shows. You're going to have something incredibly hard to spell, or a combination of 4 words, or you're going to use an extension other than a .com, and nowadays probably even some random extension that your customers have never heard of.
Yep.
So customers are more savvy, for sure, and it is a much easier sell to sell a premium domain name. And at the same time, it is a much more accepted profession to be a domain name investor and to actually see domain names as assets. Even people that own just a couple look at them as assets. They've renewed them for many years and they know that they have value. They probably have people emailing them asking to buy them.
Yep.
And so a domain name is a true asset, and it makes our jobs easier in a way, because now we're transacting assets that everyone agrees, both buyer and seller, has values, and they just have to come to an agreement on the value.
Yep. Great. Staying ahead, the naming landscape is constantly changing. how do you keep the marketplace fresh and relevant?
That actually is a very good question. And it's part of the benefit of having sellers and creatives on your platform, because now you have 1,000 people watching market trends, not just yourself. And when names are being submitted for consideration in our marketplace, you can actually see trends change when looking at what's being submitted to you from this community of investors around you. And at the same time, usually it takes a long time for trends to go out of fashion. In the early part of this of our marketplace, 2010, 2011, misspellings, names with no E before the R, like blogger, were very, very popular. And that's not the case anymore. But we still have a few of those. But most likely, the owners of those names have kind of seen the trend go and they've let them drop and they don't exist on our marketplace anymore.
Yeah.
Pricing trends are a bit harder. For the past, I would say maybe 5 years ago, when money was free flowing, there was a lot of VC money in the marketplace or in the industry. A lot of startups were given unlimited budgets for their domain name. Everyone wanted a single word dictionary name for their company. And for the companies that didn't have quite as much funding, they also wanted a single word dictionary name, but maybe it had a slight misspelling. It had a Y instead of an I, or it had double I's or double A's. And everyone wanted that single word because it was an era of confidence. It's like, I have a lot of money behind me. I'm going to launch on this one feature and I'm going to sell my company for billions. But we've seen that trend backtrack a bit. And now we're in an era with not a lot of VC funding. The market is a little shaky and people are starting to buy invented names again. They're looking ahead of, maybe my first idea will not succeed and I'll have to pivot. So my name should be a little more broad, a little more generic, so that I can find my footing. And when I do get funding, then I'll be able to use that funding to make this invented name that I've chosen into a brand. So that leaves behind then all of kind of the higher price point that we as sellers had put on single dictionary word domain names. We're having to kind of go through and maybe retrench those a little bit because they're not so much in demand. And at the same time, we're having to increase the prices of very pronounceable, spellable, short 5 and 6 letter names.
Okay. Awesome. So, going back through the times, from the early days till today, has there been a sale or a name that really stuck with you emotionally or creatively?
There have been a couple.
Just a couple?
The ones that really, when people ask me what I do,
Yeah.
I can give them examples, things that really touched me. The first one was Envato. And Envato is a large marketplace, as you know, for themes and
WordPress
templates, designer tools, and
Yeah.
designer offerings, all under the umbrella of Envato. There's Theme Forest and
Yeah.
different things, but the overall marketplace was called the Envato Marketplace. And it was kind of the first justification we had that we could show everybody of a company can come with a completely blank slate and just look at a word and it strikes meaning with them. It meant nothing to us, but it meant something to them. And they bought it and they turned it into a name that a lot of people know.
Yeah.
And so people can, when they ask, what do you do? We sell names like Envato. And the other one that I love was one of my own names, Zomato, tomato with a Z, or Zomato if you're British. When I registered that name, I loved that name. It was silly, but it was memorable. It's like everybody knows what a tomato is, but then it's got this Z on it. And I really thought it would never sell. It was just kind of the thing that I'm like, oh, this is my little pet thing. But I'm going to put it up here. And the fact that a very, very large company in India bought it and turned it into one of the most well-known brands in India makes me so excited. It's just, it really was like my little baby.
Yeah.
that
I remember having to redo the logo on that one a few times until
I was happy. Yep.
Yeah, that's very cool. So as we come to a closure with this conversation, what would be an advice or words of wisdom that you can share with the entrepreneur who has been struggling over the last days, weeks, months, alone or with their co-founders trying to figure out a name to name their business or to give to their venture? What would be some advice that you would tell them to help them get on the right path?
The advice that I would give, and the reason that we built BrandBucket, is because it ended up being this was the easiest way for us to name things, is to build a list of options, but not by brainstorming, but by looking at an available pool of options like on BrandBucket. And to really sit down, don't have too many cooks in the kitchen. If it's a single person founded company, the name should resonate with that person. Don't get too many advisors. If it's a couple people, 3 people, that's fine. But sit down and be very, very open to possibilities. So if you come in thinking we want a dictionary verb, you're going to get really stuck. So you need to sit back and say, okay, what if we named it after something in our past? What if we named it after a pet? What if we named it after where we met? What if we talked about what the product does or how the product makes you feel or what problem it solves? And for each of those options, you just look for available options that you have, make a giant list, and then sit down and see which ones really emotionally resonate with you, because it's your company at the end of the day. And names don't make the brand, people make the brand. And the messaging behind the name makes the brand, and the product behind the name makes the brand. And really, it doesn't matter what you name it if you're good enough at selling it, but the name should mean something to you, because you have to live with it and you have to sell it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you. This wraps up our conversation with Margot on the art and science of brand naming. Remember, the perfect name isn't just about the word. It's about the meaning you bring to it. If you found this helpful, check out the rest of the BrandBucket Academy series for more insight on naming, branding, and business growth. See you in the next video.